The steady beep of the heart monitor echoed through the pristine white room like a countdown clock. Robert Ashford pressed his palms against the cold glass of the neonatal intensive care unit, his breath fogging the barrier between him and his dying daughter. 3 weeks old, and Emma Rose Ashford was slipping away despite being surrounded by the most advanced medical technology money could buy. "Mr. Ashford, you should rest." A nurse spoke softly behind him, but her words felt hollow. Rest? How could anyone rest while watching their child fight for life? Robert's reflection stared back at him in the glass. A 42-year-old man who'd built Ashford Technologies from a garage startup into a $4 billion empire. His face had graced the covers of Forbes, Fortune, and Time. He'd been called a genius, a visionary, a man who could turn ideas into gold. Yet standing here, watching his daughter's tiny chest struggle with each breath, he felt like the most powerless person on earth. "Rob," Margaret's voice cracked behind him. His wife of 12 years looked like a ghost of herself. Her auburn hair, usually perfectly styled, hung limp and uncombed. Dark circles shadowed her once bright green eyes. She hadn't left the hospital in 4 days, surviving on vending machine coffee and sheer willpower. Robert turned and pulled her close, feeling her body shake with silent sobs. They'd wanted this baby for 8 years. 8 years of fertility treatments, failed IVF attempts, crushing disappointments, and mounting medical bills, though money had never been the issue. They'd almost given up hope when Dr. Morrison delivered the news: Margaret was pregnant. The pregnancy had been textbook perfect. Every ultrasound, every test, every checkup showed a healthy, thriving baby girl. They'd decorated the nursery in soft yellows and whites, bought enough toys to fill a small store, and interviewed a dozen nannies before finding the perfect one. Robert had even turned down a speaking engagement in Tokyo to be present for the birth. Emma's arrival on October 3rd had been the happiest moment of their lives. 7 pounds, 4 ounces of absolute perfection. Margaret had cried tears of joy as she held their daughter for the first time. Robert had stood in the delivery room, completely overwhelmed by the fierce protective love that crashed over him like a tidal wave. For 5 glorious days, life was perfect. They brought Emma home to their sprawling Atherton estate. Friends visited with congratulations and gifts. Margaret glowed with happiness despite her exhaustion. Robert found himself leaving work early, something he'd never done, just to hold his daughter and breathe in her sweet baby smell. Then everything shattered. On day 6, Emma wouldn't eat. By day 7, she was lethargic and wouldn't wake for feedings. Margaret, following every new mother instinct screaming inside her, rushed Emma to Stanford Medical Center. The pediatrician ran tests, blood work, cultures, scans. Nothing conclusive. "Probably just an infection," they said. "We'll keep her for observation." But Emma didn't improve. She got worse. The seizures started on day 9, violent jerking movements that made Margaret scream for help. Emma's tiny body would stiffen and convulse while alarms shrieked from the monitors surrounding her incubator. Doctors flooded the room, shouting medical terms Robert didn't understand. Code this, stat that, numbers and measurements that added up to one terrifying truth: they didn't know what was wrong. Robert made calls, not just to doctors at Stanford, but to chiefs of pediatrics at every major hospital in the country. His assistant, usually booking meetings with venture capitalists and tech CEOs, now coordinated consultations with medical specialists. Dr. Patricia Holloway flew in from Boston Children's Hospital. Dr. James Chen came from UCLA Medical Center. Dr. Rajesh Patel arrived from Johns Hopkins. One by one, they examined Emma. They reviewed her charts, debated diagnoses, ordered new tests. Genetic screening negative, metabolic panels inconclusive, brain scans normal structure but abnormal activity, cultures for every bacteria, virus, and parasite known to medicine, all negative. By day 14, 18 different doctors had examined Emma Rose Ashford. 18 brilliant minds, representing centuries of combined medical experience and some of the finest institutions in the world. and not one of them could tell Robert and Margaret what was killing their daughter. "We're missing something," Dr. Morrison admitted during a consultation in his office. He looked exhausted, defeated. "Every condition we test for comes back negative, but Emma's symptoms are progressing. The respiratory distress is worsening. The seizures are increasing in frequency and severity." "What does that mean?" Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. Dr. Morrison removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "It means we're running out of time to find answers." That night Robert sat alone in his home office, surrounded by the trappings of his success: awards, patents, photos with presidents and celebrities, all meaningless now. He opened his laptop and went live on social media, something his PR team would have a heart attack over. His face appeared on screens across the country, raw, vulnerable, desperate. "My name is Robert Ashford and my daughter is dying." His voice cracked. "The best doctors in the world can't figure out what's wrong with her, so I'm begging for help. $10 million to anyone who can save my baby girl. 20 million, name your price. Just please, help us." The video went viral within an hour. News stations picked it up. Social media exploded with theories, prayers, and offers of help from doctors, healers, and ordinary people moved by a father's desperation. But as dawn broke on day 15, Emma was worse. The lead physician, Dr. Webster, pulled Robert aside with the news he'd been dreading. "Mr. Ashford, I think you and your wife should prepare yourselves. Without a diagnosis, without knowing what we're fighting, Emma has perhaps 48 hours. I'm so very sorry." Robert walked back to the NICU on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. Through the glass, he could see Margaret slumped in a chair beside Emma's incubator, one hand resting on the clear plastic that separated mother from daughter. His wife was singing softly, a lullaby she'd been practicing for years, waiting for this baby. Money couldn't buy a cure. Fame couldn't diagnose the mystery. Power meant nothing in the face of death. All Robert Ashford could do was watch, wait, and pray for a miracle that seemed impossibly far away. What he didn't know was that the miracle was closer than he imagined, and it would come from the last place anyone expected. The private jet touched down at San Francisco International Airport at 4:47 a.m. Robert Ashford hadn't slept in 36 hours. His eyes burned with exhaustion, but adrenaline kept him moving. Dr. Harrison Webb, the 18th specialist, emerged from the aircraft looking crisp and professional despite the red-eye flight from Baltimore. "Mr. Ashford," Dr. Webb extended his hand. He was a legend in pediatric neurology, a man who diagnosed impossible cases, who'd written textbooks that medical students studied worldwide. "I've reviewed Emma's files during the flight. Let's not waste any time." Robert's driver navigated the empty pre-dawn streets towards Stanford Medical Center. In the backseat, Dr. Webb scrolled through test results on his tablet, his brow furrowed in concentration. Robert watched him, searching for any flicker of recognition, any sign that this doctor, number 18, would be the one to crack the mystery. They arrived at the hospital as the sun began painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. A beautiful morning, completely at odds with the darkness Robert felt crushing his chest. Margaret was exactly where he'd left her 6 hours ago, beside Emma's incubator, holding their daughter's impossibly small hand through the porthole openings. "Maggie," Robert touched her shoulder gently. She looked up at him with hollow eyes. "This is Dr. Webb from Johns Hopkins." Margaret nodded numbly. She'd stopped asking questions days ago, stopped hoping that the next doctor would have answers. Hope was a luxury she could no longer afford. Dr. Webb spent 3 hours examining Emma. He watched her seizures, studied her breathing patterns, reviewed every scan and test result from the past 2 weeks. He consulted with the other specialists. He made phone calls to colleagues across the country. Robert paced the hallway outside, wearing a path in the linoleum, checking his watch every 30 seconds. Finally, Dr. Webb emerged from the NICU. Robert searched his face desperately, looking for something, anything, that resembled hope. "Mr. Ashford, Mrs. Ashford." Dr. Webb's voice was gentle but firm. "I need you to understand that I've spent my entire career diagnosing neurological disorders in children. I've seen conditions so rare they don't even have names yet. But your daughter," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "Emma's presentation doesn't fit any pattern I recognize. The seizure activity, the respiratory distress, the metabolic irregularities, they're all symptoms we see in various conditions, but never quite in this combination." "So what does that mean?" Robert's voice came out harsher than he intended. "You're giving up too." "I'm not giving up. I'm being honest with you. Whatever Emma has, it's either something so rare that medical literature barely documents it, or it's something we haven't discovered yet." Dr. Webb removed his glasses and met Robert's eyes. "I'm sorry I don't have better news." Robert felt something snap inside him. The carefully maintained composure, the businessman's calm, it all shattered. "Sorry," his voice rose. "I flew you here on my private jet. You're supposed to be the best. That's what they said about the last 17 doctors too." "Mr. Ashford," a nurse began. "No," Robert spun toward her. "Don't tell me to calm down. My daughter is dying and no one can tell me why." His voice echoed through the hallway. Other parents in the NICU waiting area stared. Security guards took a step forward. Margaret appeared in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. "Rob, please, Emma can hear you, she's scared." The fight drained out of Robert instantly. He stumbled to a chair and buried his face in his hands. Margaret sat beside him, and they held each other while their world continued to crumble. Dr. Webb left that afternoon. So did the team from UCLA. The Mayo Clinic consultant sent her regrets via email. She had nothing new to offer. One by one, the brilliant minds that Robert had assembled scattered back to their hospitals and universities, leaving behind only their failures. That evening, Robert sat in his office at Ashford Technologies, staring at his computer screen. He'd ignored work for 2 weeks, and his company was managing without him, proof that he wasn't as indispensable as he'd thought. The realization felt oddly liberating and terrifying at the same time. His phone buzzed constantly. News outlets wanted interviews. Talk shows wanted him as a guest. Social media was exploding with his desperate plea. "Billionaire offers fortune to save dying daughter," screamed the headlines. Some people praised his devotion. Others criticized him for thinking money could solve everything. Internet trolls suggested he was lying for publicity. Conspiracy theorists claimed Emma didn't exist. Robert didn't care about any of it. Let them talk. Let them judge. He'd give away every penny he had, every asset, every share of stock if it meant saving Emma. His assistant knocked softly on the door. "Mr. Ashford, there are 73 more doctors who have reached out, offering to consult. And," she hesitated, "also about 400 alternative medicine practitioners, faith healers, and people claiming they can cure Emma with everything from essential oils to prayer circles." Robert laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "Schedule the doctors, all of them, I don't care if it takes a month." But they didn't have a month. They barely had days. At midnight, Robert returned to the hospital. He'd been going home to shower and change clothes, maintaining some pretense of normal life, but tonight he couldn't leave. He found Margaret asleep in the chair beside Emma's incubator, her hand still reaching through the porthole to touch their daughter. Robert stood at the window, watching his baby girl fight for every breath. Emma's tiny chest rose and fell irregularly. The machines tracking her vitals showed numbers that meant nothing to Robert but everything to the nurses who kept glancing at them with worried expressions. "I'm sorry, baby girl," Robert whispered to the glass. "Daddy can't fix this. All the money in the world and I can't fix this." In that moment, Robert Ashford, entrepreneur, billionaire, man of action, felt completely and utterly defeated. He'd conquered every challenge in his professional life through determination, intelligence, and resources. But this was beyond him. What he didn't know was that just 3 floors below, in the hospital's basement, a 12-year-old boy was pushing a mop across the tile floor and thinking about the mysterious baby everyone was talking about. A boy who'd been listening to the doctor's conversations for weeks, piecing together a puzzle that 18 specialists had missed. A boy who'd noticed something that would change everything. But that discovery was still hours away, and for now, Robert Ashford could only watch his daughter slip further away, wondering if dawn would bring a miracle or the worst day of his life. Miguel Torres pushed his mop across the gleaming floor of Stanford Medical Center's 3rd-floor corridor, his movements rhythmic and practiced. Most people didn't notice the janitors. They were part of the background, like the beige walls or the fluorescent lights humming overhead. That invisibility suited Miguel just fine. It meant he could observe without being observed, listen without being heard, and learn without being questioned. At 12 years old, Miguel shouldn't have been working at all. Child labor laws made that clear. But his father Carlos needed help, and the hospital administration looked the other way as long as Miguel stayed quiet and did his work. They called him Carlos's assistant, a technicality that kept everyone's conscience clear while Miguel earned money his family desperately needed. The Torres family lived in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in East Palo Alto, a world away from the mansions of nearby Atherton where people like the Ashfords resided. Miguel shared a bedroom with his 2 younger sisters, Maria and Sofia. His mother worked double shifts at a laundry service. His father mopped floors and cleaned toilets at one of the most advanced medical facilities in the world. It was 11:47 p.m. and Miguel had been at the hospital since 7:00 p.m., straight from school to work, grabbing a convenience store burrito for dinner. His backpack, stuffed with homework he'd complete during his father's breaks, sat in the janitor's closet on the 1st floor. Most kids his age were probably playing Fortnite or watching Netflix. Miguel was here in these sterile hallways, and he wouldn't have it any other way. Because Stanford Medical Center was Miguel's real school. While other janitors listened to music through earbuds or chatted on their phones during shifts, Miguel listened to doctors. He absorbed their conversations in elevators, their debates in break rooms, their frustrated discussions in hallways. Medical terminology that would confuse most adults had become Miguel's second language. Tachycardia, hypoxia, differential diagnosis. Words that danced through his mind like old friends. The hospital library had become Miguel's sanctuary. During his father's dinner break, Miguel would slip into the medical library, technically for physicians and medical students only, but the night librarian, Mrs. Chen, had stopped questioning him months ago. She'd found him there one night, completely absorbed in a journal article about pediatric cardiology, and instead of kicking him out, she'd simply smiled and brought him a hot chocolate. "You read like you're starving," she'd told him, "like these words are food." She wasn't wrong. Miguel devoured medical journals, textbooks, case studies, anything he could understand. He taught himself to read EKG strips, to recognize symptoms of rare conditions, to think like the doctors he admired from afar. He kept a worn spiral notebook filled with notes, observations, and questions he'd probably never get to ask. For the past 2 weeks, one case had consumed everyone's attention: baby Emma Ashford. Miguel had first heard about her when he was cleaning outside the NICU. 2 nurses were talking in hushed, worried tones. 18 specialists and nobody knows what's wrong with her, that poor family. Miguel's ears had perked up. A medical mystery. He couldn't help himself. He started paying attention. He learned Emma's symptoms by eavesdropping on doctors' rounds. Seizures, multiple types, both tonic-clonic and myoclonic. Respiratory distress requiring supplemental oxygen. Lethargy and poor feeding. Progressive neurological decline. The doctors threw around possibilities: rare genetic disorders, unusual infections, metabolic conditions. But every test came back negative or inconclusive. Miguel began researching during his library time. He'd pull up articles on pediatric neurology, metabolic disorders, anything that might explain Emma's constellation of symptoms. It became an obsession, a puzzle he couldn't stop trying to solve even though he knew he had no business attempting to diagnose what 18 real doctors couldn't figure out. Who was he, after all? Just a poor kid who mopped floors. Tonight, Miguel's route took him past the NICU. Through the viewing window, he could see nurses moving between incubators, their faces tense with concentration. The Ashford baby was in there somewhere, fighting for her life while the world's best doctors stood by helplessly. Miguel parked his mop bucket and moved closer to the NICU entrance to empty the trash can there. That's when he noticed it. The door to Emma's room was slightly ajar. A nurse had just exited, arms full of used supplies, and hadn't quite pulled it shut. Hospital protocol said the door should be closed, but Miguel didn't move to close it. Instead, he found himself drawn closer. He shouldn't look. He knew he shouldn't, but his feet carried him forward anyway. Through the gap in the door, Miguel could see into Emma's room. The baby lay in her incubator, impossibly small and fragile, connected to a web of tubes and wires. Monitors beeped steadily. A man, Mr. Ashford, Miguel assumed, sat slumped in a chair nearby, his face buried in his hands. The raw grief radiating from him made Miguel's chest ache. Miguel was about to turn away when a faint scent caught his attention. He froze, his nose twitching. It was subtle, almost imperceptible beneath the usual hospital smells of disinfectant and latex, but it was there, a sweet smell, oddly familiar like. His mind raced. Where had he smelled that before? Not in the hospital, somewhere else. Something his mother cooked. No, something he'd read about, maybe. Miguel closed his eyes, trying to pin down the elusive memory. Sweet, distinctive, almost like maple syrup, but not quite. Why did that seem important? Then it hit him like a lightning bolt. His eyes snapped open and his heart began to pound. No, it couldn't be. He must be wrong. But the pieces started falling into place in his mind with terrifying clarity. The seizures, the respiratory problems, the neurological decline, and now this smell. Miguel backed away from the door, his hands trembling. He needed to check something. Immediately. He abandoned his mop bucket and practically ran down the hallway to the stairs, taking them two at a time down to the first floor. He burst into the janitor's closet, startling his father. "Mijo, what's wrong?" Carlos looked alarmed. "I need to go to the library. Right now, it's important." Carlos frowned. "Miguel, it's almost midnight." "Please, Papa, just 20 minutes, I think. I think I know what's wrong with the baby everyone's talking about." His father stared at him. "Miguel, you're a child, the doctors." "The doctors are missing it." Miguel's voice came out more forcefully than he intended. "I need to check something, please." Something in Miguel's expression must have convinced Carlos. He sighed and nodded. 20 minutes, then back to work. Miguel ran. The medical library was dim, only emergency lighting illuminating the rows of books and journals. Miguel's fingers flew across the computer keyboard as he pulled up the medical database. He typed in search terms, his mind racing faster than his fingers could move. Maple syrup urine disease. He whispered the words as the articles loaded. His eyes scanned frantically, absorbing information he'd read months ago but hadn't fully retained. MSUD, a rare metabolic disorder affecting the breakdown of branched-chain amino acids. Incidence, approximately 1 in 185,000 births. Symptoms, poor feeding, vomiting, lethargy, seizures, developmental delays, and critically, a distinctive sweet odor in the urine, cerumen, and sweat, described as similar to maple syrup or burnt sugar. Miguel's hands shook as he read. The classic form usually presented within days of birth. It was typically caught by newborn screening tests, but false negatives could occur, especially with variant forms. Without treatment, the condition was fatal. With treatment, a specialized diet and careful monitoring, children could live relatively normal lives. Emma's symptoms matched perfectly. And that smell, that sweet, distinctive smell near her incubator, was the telltale sign that doctors rarely encountered because the disease was so rare. Miguel sat back in his chair, his mind reeling. He could be wrong, probably was wrong. What were the chances that a 12-year-old janitor's son had diagnosed something that 18 specialists, including experts from Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic, and UCLA, had missed? But what if he was right? Emma was dying. The doctors had admitted they'd run out of options. If Miguel said nothing and she died, and he'd been right all along. He pulled out his spiral notebook and began to write, his handwriting shaky but determined. He documented everything, Emma's symptoms as he'd overheard them described, the sweet smell he'd noticed, the diagnostic criteria for MSUD, the specific tests that would confirm the diagnosis, and the treatment protocol. It took him 40 minutes, not 20. When Carlos found him, ready to scold, he saw his son's face, pale, intense, frightened, and the words died in his throat. "Papa," Miguel said quietly, holding up his notebook, "I think I know how to save her, but nobody's going to listen to me. Why would they? I'm nobody." Carlos Torres looked at his son, his brilliant, kind, invisible son, and made a decision that would change everything. "Then we make them listen." Miguel sat on the concrete steps outside the hospital's service entrance, his notebook clutched against his chest. The night air was cold, but he barely felt it. His father stood a few feet away, smoking a cigarette, a habit he'd supposedly quit 3 years ago but returned to when stressed. "Tell me again," Carlos said, exhaling smoke into the darkness. "Explain it so I understand." Miguel's voice was small. "Maple syrup urine disease, MSUD. It's a metabolic disorder where the body can't break down certain amino acids, leucine, isoleucine, and valine. They build up in the blood and become toxic, causing brain damage, seizures, and eventually death. And you think this baby has it?" "All her symptoms match, Papa. The seizures, the breathing problems, the way she's getting worse so fast. And the smell," Miguel's eyes lit up despite his fear. "That's the key. The disease is named for the sweet smell it causes. I noticed it near her room tonight. The doctors probably haven't gotten close enough to smell it, or maybe they did but didn't recognize it because it's so rare." Carlos crushed his cigarette under his boot. And these doctors, these famous doctors who went to Harvard and Johns Hopkins, they never thought of this. Miguel shook his head. "MSUD is supposed to be caught by newborn screening. Every baby in California gets tested, but the tests can give false negatives, especially for variant forms. If Emma's screening came back normal, the doctors would never think to look for it again. Why would they? The test said she didn't have it. So the test was wrong. Maybe, or maybe she has an unusual variant that the standard screening doesn't catch well." Miguel's hands tightened on his notebook. "Papa, if I'm right, the treatment is simple. A special diet low in those amino acids, some supplements, careful monitoring. She could recover. She could live." Carlos was quiet for a long moment. Then he knelt down in front of his son, putting his rough, calloused hands on Miguel's thin shoulders. "And if you're wrong?" That was the question that had been eating at Miguel for the past hour. "If I'm wrong, I humiliate myself. Maybe you lose your job for having me here. We look like fools who thought we knew better than real doctors. And if you're right but you say nothing?" Miguel felt tears burn his eyes. "Then Emma dies, and I could have saved her." Carlos pulled his son into a fierce hug. Miguel pressed his face against his father's uniform shirt, which smelled of industrial cleaner and sweat. "You are 12 years old, Mijo. This should not be your burden to carry." "But it is," Miguel whispered. "I know something they don't know. How can I stay quiet?" Carlos pulled back and looked into his son's eyes, eyes that held far too much knowledge and worry for someone so young. "You cannot. Your mother and I, we raised you to speak the truth, to help when you can help. But Miguel, you need to understand, the world doesn't work the way it should. These doctors, they have degrees from famous schools. They have offices with their names on the door. You clean their floors. I know. Let me finish. Carlos's voice was gentle but firm. They will not want to hear from you. They will be angry that a poor child whose father empties their trash, dares to question them. They will think you are crazy or seeking attention. They might laugh at you. Miguel's voice cracked. I know. But sometimes, Carlos continued, the right thing and the easy thing are not the same. Your mother and I, we came to this country with nothing. We work hard so you and your sisters can have better lives. We didn't know you'd be so smart, so hungry to learn. That's God's gift to you, but gifts come with responsibilities. What do I do, Papa? Carlos stood, pulling Miguel to his feet. You do what your heart tells you, but you do it smart. These doctors, they won't listen to you directly. We need to find someone who will. They returned to the third floor, Miguel's legs feeling like lead with each step. As they emerged from the stairwell, they saw her, Dr. Sarah Chen, the young resident Miguel had noticed over the past weeks. She was different from the other doctors. Younger, less arrogant, and she'd always smiled at Miguel when their paths crossed. She'd even asked his name once. That one, Carlos whispered. She's not like the others, try her. But Miguel froze. Dr. Chen was standing at the nurse's station, reviewing charts. She looked exhausted, her black hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, dark circles under her eyes. How could he possibly approach her? What would he say? I can't, Miguel breathed. Papa, I can't do this. You can, Carlos said firmly. I'll be right here. Dr. Chen turned and began walking down the hallway away from them. This was the moment, now or never. Miguel felt his feet rooted to the floor, his courage evaporating. Then he thought of Emma. That tiny baby, tubes and wires everywhere fighting for every breath. He thought of Mr. Ashford's face, crumpled with grief. He thought of Mrs. Ashford, who sang lullabies to a daughter who might never grow old enough to remember them. Miguel's feet started moving before his brain caught up. Dr. Chen. His voice came out as a squeak. She turned, surprised. Oh, hello, Miguel, right? He nodded, unable to speak. His throat had closed up. Dr. Chen smiled tiredly. Shouldn't you be home? It's almost 1 a.m. Does your father know you're… She paused, seeing Carlos standing nearby. Oh, you're working together, that's sweet. Dr. Chen, Miguel managed, his voice barely above a whisper. I have to tell you something about baby Emma, the Ashford baby. Her smile faded, replaced by confusion. Miguel, that's a private medical case. I can't discuss. I know what's wrong with her. The words tumbled out in a rush. I think I know, and if I'm right, she can be saved, but nobody's testing for it because the newborn screening probably showed a false negative, and there's a smell, a sweet smell, and all her symptoms match perfectly. Miguel slowed down. Dr. Chen held up a hand, looking uncomfortable. You're a child. You can't possibly. Please, Miguel thrust his notebook toward her. Just read this, please. If I'm wrong, you can throw it away and never talk to me again. But if I'm right, his voice broke. If I'm right and nobody listens, she's going to die. Dr. Chen stared at him, then at the notebook. Miguel could see the conflict on her face, the exhaustion, the skepticism, but also something else. Curiosity, compassion. Dr. Chen, Carlos spoke up, his accented English careful and respectful. My son, he is very smart. He reads all the time, medical books, journals. He's not trying to cause trouble. He just wants to help. Dr. Chen looked between father and son. Miguel held his breath, his entire body trembling. Everything depended on this moment. Would she take the notebook? Would she even look at it? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Dr. Chen reached out and took the notebook from Miguel's shaking hands. I'll read it, she said quietly. But Miguel, you need to understand. Even if your theory is interesting, I can't just walk up to the chief of pediatrics and tell him a 12-year-old janitor's son has diagnosed what 18 specialists couldn't. It doesn't work that way. Just read it, Miguel pleaded. That's all I ask. Dr. Chen nodded and walked away, Miguel's notebook tucked under her arm. Miguel watched her go, feeling suddenly empty. He'd done it. He'd spoken up. Now all he could do was wait and pray he wasn't about to make the biggest fool of himself in Stanford Medical Center history. Come on, Mijo, Carlos said gently. We have work to finish. But Miguel couldn't move. He stood in that hallway, staring after Dr. Chen, knowing that somewhere in that notebook was either the answer that would save Emma's life or the evidence of a 12-year-old's massive hubris. In 6 hours, he'd find out which one. Dr. Sarah Chen sat in the residence lounge at 2:17 a.m., Miguel's worn notebook open on the table before her. Around her, 2 other residents dozed in chairs, too exhausted to make it home between shifts. The coffee in her cup had gone cold an hour ago, but she hadn't noticed. She was too absorbed in what she was reading. The handwriting was a child's, slightly messy, some words crossed out and rewritten, but the content was astonishing. Miguel had documented everything methodically. Emma's symptoms were listed with the precision of a medical chart: onset of seizures on day 9, progressive respiratory distress, lethargy, poor feeding response, declining neurological function. Below that, he'd written a differential diagnosis, the list of possible conditions that could explain the symptoms. Sarah recognized conditions she'd studied in medical school, rare metabolic disorders that most doctors never saw in practice. Then came Miguel's theory: maple syrup urine disease, specifically a variant form that might have evaded standard newborn screening. Sarah felt her heart rate pick up as she read his reasoning. He'd compared Emma's symptom progression to documented MSUD cases, noting the similarities. He'd referenced specific medical journals, some she'd read herself during her pediatric rotation. He'd even calculated the statistical likelihood of a false negative on newborn screening tests for MSUD variants, approximately 1 in every 250 cases. But it was the final paragraph that made Sarah's hands shake. I smelled it, near her incubator, sweet like maple syrup or burnt sugar. I read about it in Pediatric Metabolic Disorders, a clinical guide by Dr. James Morton, page 347. The smell is diagnostic. If you get close enough to baby Emma and smell it too, you'll know I'm right. Please check. Please test her branch-chain amino acid levels. The test is called a plasma amino acid panel. It could save her life. I know I'm just a kid who cleans floors, but sometimes the person who sees the truth is the person nobody's looking at. Miguel Torres. Sarah closed the notebook and pressed her palms against her eyes. This was insane. A 12-year-old boy had just handed her a diagnosis that 18 renowned specialists had missed. Every logical, professional part of her screamed that this was impossible. Children didn't diagnose rare metabolic disorders. Janitors' sons didn't outthink Johns Hopkins neurologists. But Sarah had been part of Emma's care team for 2 weeks. She'd watched that baby deteriorate despite every intervention, every test, every consult. She'd seen the Ashfords' hope crumble day by day, and she'd felt the helplessness that came from knowing they were missing something but having no idea what. What if Miguel was right? Sarah stood abruptly, startling one of the sleeping residents. She grabbed Miguel's notebook and walked quickly toward the NICU. The night nurse looked up as she approached. Dr. Chen, everything okay? I need to check on the Ashford baby. Sarah's voice was steadier than she felt. Mr. Ashford is in there with her. He finally dozed off about an hour ago. I'll be quiet. Sarah entered Emma's room silently. Robert Ashford was indeed asleep, slumped awkwardly in a chair pulled close to the incubator, one hand resting protectively near his daughter. Emma lay motionless except for the slight rise and fall of her chest, her tiny face peaceful despite the tubes and wires. Sarah approached the incubator slowly, her heart pounding. She felt ridiculous, A second-year resident sneaking into a patient's room at 2 a.m. to smell a baby because a 12-year-old told her to. If anyone found out, she'd be laughed out of the program. But she had to know. Sarah leaned closer to the incubator, close enough that her nose was inches from one of the ventilation holes. She breathed in slowly, filtering through the usual hospital smells: antiseptic, plastic, the faint scent of baby powder from Emma's last diaper change. And then she caught it. Sweet, distinctive, subtle but definitely there, an unusual smell that didn't belong. Not quite maple syrup but close, almost like caramelized sugar or burnt honey. Sarah stepped back, her mind racing. It could be coincidence, could be something else entirely, but combined with Emma's symptoms. She pulled out her phone and quickly searched for MSUD diagnostic criteria. The smell was right. The symptoms were right. The timeline was right. The rarity would explain why doctors hadn't considered it, especially if the newborn screening had shown negative. Sarah looked at Emma, then at Robert Ashford's exhausted face. If she did nothing and Miguel was right, this baby would die. But if she acted on a child's theory and was wrong, her medical career could be over before it truly began. Dr. Harrison Webb, the lead specialist, had explicitly told the residents yesterday, "We've exhausted all reasonable diagnostic possibilities. At this point, we're managing symptoms and keeping Emma comfortable." Translation: they'd given up. But what if they'd given up too soon? Sarah left the room, her decision crystallizing with each step. She went to the resident's computer station and logged in with shaking hands. What she was about to do violated about 6 different protocols. She was a second-year resident. She couldn't order tests without attending physician approval, especially not expensive, specialized tests. But she also knew the system's loopholes. In teaching hospitals, residents entered most orders which attendings reviewed and approved later. In the chaos of overnight shifts, sometimes orders slipped through before anyone caught them, and if she structured it correctly, buried it in routine morning lab work. Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard. She ordered a comprehensive plasma amino acid panel for Emma Ashford, marking it as stat urgent. In the notes section she wrote, "Follow-up metabolic screening, attending approval pending." It was technically fraud. She was forging Dr. Morrison's approval. If caught, she could be expelled from the residency program, possibly lose her medical license before she ever got it. Sarah's finger hovered over the submit button. This was her last chance to back out, to be sensible, to protect her career. She thought of Miguel's face, that terrified, desperate hopefulness. She thought of Emma, dying while everyone stood around helpless. She thought of why she'd become a doctor in the first place. To help people, to save lives, to be brave enough to act when action was needed. Sarah clicked submit. The order went through. Labs would draw Emma's blood during the early morning rounds, process it, and have results by afternoon. No one would question it until it was too late to stop. Sarah logged out and sat back, her heart hammering against her ribs. She just committed career suicide based on the theory of a 12-year-old boy who'd learned medicine from discarded journals. She was either about to save a baby's life or destroy her own future. Possibly both. At 3:30 a.m., Sarah finally left the hospital. She walked past the service entrance and saw them, Carlos Torres emptying a trash bin while Miguel mopped nearby. The boy looked up, his eyes finding hers across the parking lot. The question in his gaze was clear. "Did you read it? Do you believe me?" Sarah gave him the smallest nod. Miguel's face transformed, fear and hope warring for dominance. She wanted to tell him that she'd ordered the test, but she couldn't. Not yet. Not until she knew if she'd just made the best decision or the worst mistake of her life. As Sarah drove home through the empty streets, her phone sat silent in her purse. By this time tomorrow, everyone would know what she'd done. Dr. Morrison would see the unauthorized test order. The chief of pediatrics would demand an explanation. She'd have to admit she'd acted on the advice of a child. Unless Miguel was right. If Miguel was right, none of that would matter. If Miguel was right, Emma Ashford would live, and Sarah could face any consequences with a clear conscience. She just had to wait 14 hours to find out which version of her future she'd chosen. 14 hours had never seemed so long. Dr. Sarah Chen had been staring at her computer screen for 7 minutes and 43 seconds without blinking. Her coffee sat untouched beside her keyboard. A vending machine sandwich remained half unwrapped. None of it mattered. Nothing mattered except the lab results displayed on the monitor before her. Plasma amino acid panel ASHFORD, Emma DOB, 1003. Leucin, 2847 μmol/L reference range, 7170. Isoleucin, 1563 μmol/L reference range, 3090. Valine, 1891 μmol/L reference range, 13280. Interpretation: branch-chain amino acid levels severely elevated. Pattern consistent with maple syrup urine disease, MSUD. Recommend immediate dietary intervention and metabolic genetics consultation. Sarah's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of her desk. Miguel was right. A 12-year-old janitor's son had diagnosed what 18 specialists, with their combined centuries of medical training and experience, had completely missed. It was 4:47 p.m., exactly 14 hours since she'd submitted the fraudulent test order. She'd spent the day in a state of barely controlled panic, jumping every time her pager buzzed, expecting Dr. Morrison to call her into his office and demand an explanation. But the morning had passed quietly. Too quietly. By noon, Sarah had convinced herself the lab had lost the sample or deprioritized the test. Then at 4:45 p.m., the results had posted to Emma's chart. Sarah's mind raced through the implications. MSUD, maple syrup urine disease, an inborn error of metabolism so rare that most pediatricians never encountered a case. The standard newborn screening should have caught it, but Miguel had been right about that too. False negatives happened, especially with variant forms. Emma had slipped through the cracks, and without treatment those elevated amino acids had been poisoning her brain, causing seizures, neurological damage, and pushing her toward death. But it was treatable, immediately treatable. A specialized formula, strict dietary management, supplements, Emma could recover, she could live. Sarah grabbed her phone with shaking hands and pulled up Dr. Morrison's contact. Her thumb hovered over the call button. This was it, the moment she had to confess what she'd done. She'd ordered an unauthorized test based on the theory of a child. She'd violated protocol, forged approval, acted outside her scope of practice. But she'd been right. Or rather, Miguel had been right, and she'd been brave enough to listen. Sarah pressed call. Dr. Morrison, his voice was clipped busy. Dr. Morrison, it's Sarah Chen. I need you to look at Emma Ashford's labs immediately. The plasma amino acid panel. Silence, then, what plasma amino acid panel? I didn't order. I did, sir, last night. I know I should have consulted you first, but I had a theory and Dr. Chen, you ordered a specialized metabolic panel without attending approval. His voice rose. Do you have any idea how inappropriate? She has MSUD, Dr. Morrison. Maple syrup urine disease. The results just posted. Her leucin is over 2,800. We missed it. Everyone missed it. Another pause, longer this time. Sarah heard computer keys clicking, then Morrison's sharp intake of breath. My God, he whispered, it's classic MSUD. The pattern is textbook. How did I not? His voice trailed off. The newborn screening must have been a false negative, Sarah said quickly. It happens in about 1 in 250 MSUD cases, especially with variant forms. Once the screening showed negative, no one thought to retest. But you did. What made you think of it? This was the moment. Sarah could take credit, let everyone believe she'd brilliantly diagnosed the case herself. It would make her a hero, launch her career, erase any concerns about the unauthorized test order. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw Miguel's face, that desperate hope, that terrified courage. "I didn't think of it, sir." Sarah's voice was steady despite her pounding heart. "Someone else did, someone who noticed what we all missed." "Who? One of the consultants, Dr. Webb?" "No, sir. I'll explain everything, but first, Emma needs treatment immediately. We need to start her on a leucine-free formula right now. Every hour we wait risks more brain damage." Morrison's professional instincts kicked in. "You're right, I'm calling the NICU now. Meet me there in 5 minutes. And Dr. Chen, bring whoever figured this out. I need to understand how we missed this." The line went dead. Sarah sat frozen for a moment, processing what was about to happen. Then she grabbed her white coat and ran. The NICU was chaos when Sarah arrived. Dr. Morrison stood at Emma's bedside with 3 other attendings, a metabolic specialist on speakerphone from UCSF, and 2 nurses preparing the specialized formula. Robert Ashford stood pressed against the wall, his face a mixture of confusion and fragile hope. "Is it real?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Do you really know what's wrong with her?" Dr. Morrison turned, his expression grave but no longer hopeless. "Mr. Ashford, your daughter has a rare metabolic disorder called maple syrup urine disease. It's treatable, but we need to start immediately." "How? After 18 doctors, after 2 weeks, how did you suddenly figure it out?" Morrison glanced at Sarah. She stepped forward, her legs feeling unsteady. "Mr. Ashford, the diagnosis came from an unexpected source. Someone who observed what others missed, who noticed a detail that turned out to be critical." "Who? I'll pay them anything, everything. Just tell me who saved my daughter." Sarah took a deep breath. This was it, the moment that would change everything for Miguel, for her, for all of them. "A 12-year-old boy, sir. Miguel Torres, he's—" "Dr. Chen, the formula is ready," a nurse interrupted. "Should we begin?" "Yes," Morrison ordered. "Start the feeding protocol now. We'll sort out diagnostic heroics later. This baby needs treatment." They worked quickly and efficiently. The specialized leucine-free formula was administered through Emma's feeding tube. Supplements were added to support her metabolism. Blood was drawn to monitor amino acid levels. Within an hour, Emma was on the treatment protocol that should have been started at birth. Sarah stood back, watching the medical team save a life that had been slipping away. She felt exhausted, exhilarated, and terrified all at once. At 7:23 p.m., Emma's oxygen saturation levels began to improve. By 8:00 p.m., her seizure activity had noticeably decreased. By 9:15 p.m., she opened her eyes, really opened them, focusing on her mother's face for the first time in days. Margaret Ashford sobbed, pressing her hands against the incubator. "Emma, baby, Mama's here, Mama's here." Robert stood beside his wife, tears streaming down his face, one hand on Margaret's shoulder, the other pressed against the glass. "She's looking at us," he whispered. "She's really looking at us." Dr. Morrison approached Sarah in the hallway an hour later. His expression was unreadable. The metabolic specialist confirmed the diagnosis. Emma's responding beautifully to treatment. In a few weeks, with proper dietary management, she should make a full recovery. He paused. "Now, Dr. Chen, I need you to explain exactly how a 12-year-old janitor's son diagnosed maple syrup urine disease when 18 board-certified physicians couldn't." Sarah straightened her spine and told him everything. About Miguel listening to medical discussions during his father's shifts, about his self-taught medical knowledge, about the notebook full of careful observations, about the smell he'd noticed that everyone else had missed. When she finished, Morrison was silent for a long moment. "This boy, he reads medical journals for fun." "Yes, sir." "And he noticed the diagnostic odor that I, with 23 years of experience, completely missed. Yes, sir. Morrison shook his head slowly, something like wonder crossing his face. Where is he now? Sarah glanced at the clock. Probably starting his shift. He and his father cleaned this floor. Then I suggest you find him, Morrison said quietly. Because Mr. Ashford is about to offer him the world, and this boy deserves to understand exactly what he's accomplished. Sarah found Miguel on the 3rd floor, exactly where she expected him to be, pushing his mop across the same tiles where, just 24 hours ago, he'd thrust his notebook into her hands. When he saw her approaching, his face went pale. Dr. Chen, did you? Was I? Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile she'd felt in weeks. Miguel, she said softly, you were right about everything. Emma's going to live because of you. The mop clattered to the floor as Miguel's legs gave out. He sat down hard, right there in the middle of the hallway, and started to cry. Miguel sat on the floor in the hospital corridor, his thin shoulders shaking with sobs he couldn't control. Dr. Sarah Chen knelt beside him, one hand on his back, while his father Carlos rushed over from down the hall. Mijo, what happened? What's wrong? Carlos's voice was panicked as he pulled his son close. Nothing's wrong, Sarah said quickly, her own eyes bright with tears. Everything's right. Miguel was correct. Emma has MSUD, maple syrup urine disease. We started treatment 3 hours ago and she's already responding. He saved her life. Carlos stared at Dr. Chen, then down at his son, who was wiping his face with his sleeve. He was right. My Miguel was right. More than right. He diagnosed a condition that 18 specialists missed. That baby is alive because your son was brave enough to speak up. Miguel looked up at Dr. Chen with red-rimmed eyes. Is she really going to be okay? Not just for today, but really okay. With proper treatment and diet, she should live a completely normal life. You gave her a future, Miguel. Before Miguel could respond, Dr. Morrison appeared at the end of the hallway with Robert Ashford. The billionaire's eyes were still swollen from crying, his expensive suit rumpled from days of sleeping in hospital chairs. When he saw Miguel, this small, thin boy in a janitor's uniform sitting on the floor, he stopped walking. That's him, Robert's voice was barely audible. That's him, Dr. Morrison confirmed. Miguel Torres, 12 years old, reads medical journals during his father's shifts. He's the one who figured out what was killing your daughter. Robert moved forward slowly, as if approaching something fragile and precious. Miguel scrambled to his feet, wiping his face, suddenly acutely aware of his cheap clothes, his scuffed shoes, the mop bucket beside him. He was standing before one of the richest men in America, and he looked like exactly what he was, a poor kid who cleaned floors. Mr. Ashford, I'm sorry for, Miguel began, but Robert dropped to his knees right there in the hallway, putting himself at eye level with the boy. You're sorry, Robert's voice broke. Miguel, you saved my daughter, you saved my entire world. How can I? What can I possibly? He couldn't finish, overcome with emotion. Miguel didn't know what to do. He'd never seen a grown man cry like this, especially not a powerful billionaire. Awkwardly, he put his hand on Robert's shoulder. I'm just glad Emma's going to be okay. That's all that matters. Robert looked up at this boy, this incredible, impossible boy, and felt something shift inside him. For 2 weeks, he'd thrown money at the problem, demanded results, treated his daughter's illness like a business challenge to be conquered. And in the end, salvation had come from someone who had nothing, who lived in a world Robert barely acknowledged existed. How did you know? Robert asked, his voice steadier now. What made you think of it when all those doctors couldn't? Miguel shifted uncomfortably. I just noticed things. The doctors were so focused on the big tests and scans they missed the small detail. The smell. I'd read about MSUD months ago in a journal, and I remembered that the disease has this distinctive sweet smell. When I noticed it near Emma's room, everything clicked together. You smell things, Robert said slowly. that 18 doctors with all their equipment and expertise couldn't detect. I'm closer to the ground, I guess. Miguel gave a small, self-deprecating smile. Nobody pays attention to janitors. We see and hear things because people forget we're there. Dr. Morrison spoke up. Miguel's observation about the odor was crucial. MSUD is nicknamed maple syrup urine disease because of that sweet smell. It's diagnostically significant, but the condition is so rare, about 1 in 185,000 births, that most physicians never encounter it. We rely so heavily on newborn screening that when Emma's test showed negative, we never reconsidered metabolic disorders. But Miguel reconsidered, Robert said, even though he's 12. Especially because I'm 12, Miguel said quietly. I didn't know I was supposed to think it was impossible. I just knew what I'd read, what I'd observed, and what made sense. Robert stood slowly and Carlos stepped forward protectively. Mr. Ashford, my son, he meant no disrespect to the doctors. He just wanted to help. Disrespect? Robert's laugh was incredulous. Carlos, your son just taught me the most important lesson of my life. I've spent years believing that money, status, and credentials equal wisdom. But tonight, a 12-year-old who mops floors showed more insight than the world's leading specialists. He turned to Miguel. I owe you everything, and I intend to repay that debt. You don't owe me anything, Miguel protested. I just did what anyone would. No, Robert's voice was firm. Most people wouldn't have spoken up. Most people would have assumed they were wrong, that they had no right to question experts. You had courage that most adults lack. Before Miguel could respond, a commotion erupted at the end of the hallway. A security guard was trying to hold back several people with cameras and recording equipment. Mr. Ashford, a reporter's voice carried down the corridor. Is it true that a child diagnosed your daughter? Can we get a statement? Dr. Morrison cursed under his breath. Someone leaked it. The media's here. Robert's expression hardened. He turned to Carlos and Miguel. This is about to become a circus. The press will want the story, Billionaire's baby saved by poor janitor's son. They'll make you famous whether you want it or not. Miguel felt panic rising in his chest. I don't want to be famous. I just wanted to help Emma. I know, Robert said gently, but that choice is gone now. The story's too good, too dramatic. By tomorrow morning, your face will be on every news channel. He paused, studying Miguel's frightened expression. I can't stop the media from telling this story, but I can protect you from them if you'll let me. I have lawyers, PR people, resources to manage this. Carlos put his arm around Miguel. We're just simple people, Mr. Ashford. We don't know about lawyers and media. Then let me help you navigate this, Robert said. Please, it's the least I can do. The reporters had broken past security. Cameras and microphones surrounded them suddenly, voices overlapping in a cacophony of questions. Miguel, how does it feel to save a billionaire's baby? Did the doctors ignore your theory because you're poor? Mr. Ashford, will you be rewarding the boy? Robert stepped in front of Miguel protectively, holding up his hands. My family and I are incredibly grateful for Miguel Torre's observation and courage. Thanks to him, our daughter Emma is responding to treatment and has a full life ahead of her. Miguel demonstrated something that every medical professional, myself included, needs to remember, that wisdom and insight can come from anywhere, regardless of age or social status. Will you be compensating him? Another reporter shouted. Robert's jaw tightened. Miguel and his family deserve privacy and respect. Yes, I intend to ensure Miguel has every opportunity to develop his extraordinary gifts, but right now I ask that you give this family space. They didn't ask for this attention. But the media frenzy had already begun. By the time hospital security cleared the hallway, Miguel was shaking. Carlos held his son close while Robert spoke urgently on his phone, arranging lawyers and security personnel. Dr. Sarah Chen watched it all unfold, feeling responsible for starting this avalanche. She'd given Miguel's name to Dr. Morrison, who'd apparently shared it with someone who'd contacted the press. Now this brilliant, humble boy was about to be thrust into a spotlight that could either make or break him. Later that night, after Robert's security team had escorted the Torres family safely home, Sarah visited Emma's room. The baby was sleeping peacefully, her vital signs stronger than they'd been in 2 weeks. Margaret Ashford sat beside the incubator, finally looking hopeful instead of hopeless. "Dr. Chen," Margaret said softly, "Robert told me what you did, ordering that test without approval, believing in Miguel when you could have dismissed him." Sarah shrugged. "I almost didn't. I almost threw away his notebook and forgot about it." "But you didn't. You listened to someone everyone else would have ignored." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "You and Miguel, you both saw my daughter when others had already given up. I'll never forget that." As Sarah left the hospital that night, she checked her phone. The story had exploded online. 12-year-old janitor's son saves billionaire's baby after 18 doctors failed was trending on every social media platform. Miguel's school photo, probably taken from a yearbook, was everywhere. Comments ranged from admiration to skepticism to ugly insinuations about publicity stunts. Sarah hoped Miguel was okay. Hoped the Ashfords would protect him as promised. Hoped this wouldn't crush the beautiful curiosity and courage that had saved a life. Because the world needed more people like Miguel Torres, people who saw what others missed, who spoke up despite fear, who believed that truth mattered more than status. And tomorrow, when the sun rose on this impossible story, everything would change for the 12-year-old boy who'd done the unthinkable 5 years later. Miguel Torres stood outside Stanford Medical Center's main entrance, no longer wearing a janitor's uniform but a crisp white coat with Miguel Torres, pre-med intern, embroidered on the pocket. At 17, he was the youngest pre-med intern in the hospital's history. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his stethoscope, not from nervousness about his first day, but from the weight of memory. 5 years ago, he'd walked through these same doors as an invisible 12-year-old, pushing a mop and dreaming of a life that seemed impossibly out of reach. Today, he was walking through them as a future doctor, living a reality that still sometimes felt like someone else's dream. "Miguel," a small voice squealed across the lobby. Emma Ashford, now a vibrant 5-year-old with her mother's auburn hair and her father's bright blue eyes, broke free from Margaret's hand and ran toward him. Miguel knelt down and caught her in a hug, her tiny arms wrapping around his neck with the unself-conscious affection of a child who'd never known she'd almost died. "Are you really a doctor now?" Emma asked, touching his white coat with reverent fingers. "Not quite yet, Pequeña," Miguel laughed, using the Spanish nickname he'd given her years ago. "I have many more years of school, but I'm getting closer." Margaret approached, her face radiant with health and happiness, so different from the hollow-eyed, broken woman Miguel remembered from that terrible night 5 years ago. "Miguel, we're so proud of you. Your first day as an intern." "Thanks to your family," Miguel said quietly. "I wouldn't be here without the Ashfords." "No," came Robert's voice from behind them. The billionaire emerged from the elevator, carrying a large gift bag. "You'd be here regardless, Miguel. Maybe it would have taken longer, maybe the path would have been harder, but your mind, your dedication, your courage, those were always yours. We just removed some obstacles." Over the past 5 years, Robert Ashford had kept every promise he'd made that chaotic night in the hospital corridor. The media frenzy that followed Miguel's diagnosis of Emma had been intense and often overwhelming. Reporters camped outside the Torres family's apartment. Miguel's school was besieged with interview requests. The story became a national sensation. "Poor genius boy saves billionaire's baby." But Robert had protected them. His lawyers ensured the Torres family's privacy. His PR team managed the narrative, keeping the focus on medical awareness rather than sensationalism. And most importantly, he'd established the Miguel Torres Medical Scholarship Fund with an initial endowment of $50 million. The fund didn't just support Miguel, though it covered his private school education, SAT tutoring, college application costs, and would eventually fund his entire journey through medical school. It supported hundreds of other students from low-income families who demonstrated exceptional aptitude in science and medicine. Carlos Torres now managed the fund's community outreach program, identifying talented students in underserved communities. He no longer cleaned floors, he changed lives. Miguel's mother, Rosa, had been able to quit her exhausting laundry service job. His sisters, Maria and Sofia, attended the same excellent private school as Miguel, their brilliant minds finally given proper resources to flourish. The Torres family had moved from their cramped two-bedroom apartment to a comfortable home in a safe neighborhood, not a mansion, but theirs, truly theirs. But Robert had done more than change one family's circumstances. "Come with me," Robert said to Miguel. "I want to show you something before your shift starts." They walked through the hospital corridors together, Robert, Margaret, Emma, and Miguel. Staff members smiled and nodded as they passed. Everyone knew this story, this unlikely family bound together by crisis and gratitude. Robert stopped in front of a new wing of the hospital, completed just 6 months ago. Above the entrance, brass letters read, "The See What Others Miss Institute for Diagnostic Medicine." "This," Robert said, gesturing to the building, "is your legacy, Miguel. Well, part of it." Miguel had been inside before, but the significance still took his breath away. The institute was revolutionary, a diagnostic center that incorporated insights from everyone involved in patient care. Nurses, technicians, janitors, cafeteria workers, security guards, all were trained to observe and report unusual details. Their observations were valued equally with physicians' notes. The institute had already solved 3 previously mysterious cases. A cafeteria worker noticed a patient's food had an unusual metallic taste, leading to the diagnosis of a rare heavy metal toxicity. A janitor observed that a patient's room had an ammonia-like smell, catching a urea cycle disorder. A security guard noticed a pattern in when certain patients experienced symptoms, revealing an environmental trigger. "You taught us that expertise isn't just about credentials," Robert said softly. "It's about observation, curiosity, and the courage to speak up. We were so arrogant, so sure that our expensive educations made us infallible. You proved us wrong." Dr. Sarah Chen appeared from inside the institute. She was no longer a nervous second-year resident, but a confident attending physician specializing in metabolic disorders. She'd become one of the country's leading experts on MSUD, publishing papers and training other physicians to recognize the condition. "Miguel," she smiled warmly, "ready for your first day. I'm your supervising physician for this rotation." Miguel grinned. "You're going to make me work twice as hard as the other interns, aren't you?" "Absolutely," Sarah laughed. "You set impossibly high standards for yourself when you were 12. I'm just making sure you maintain them." As they entered the institute, Emma tugged on Miguel's coat. "Miguel, will you visit me this week? Mama says you're going to be very busy now." Miguel knelt down to her level, taking her small hands in his. "Emma, I will always have time for you. You know why?" "Why?" "Because you taught me the most important lesson I'll ever learn as a doctor." "What lesson? I was just a baby." "That every patient matters, that every life is worth fighting for, that sometimes the most important thing a doctor can do is listen to the quiet voices everyone else ignores." He touched her nose gently. "You were dying and nobody was listening. I listened and you lived. That's what doctors should do." Margaret wiped tears from her eyes. Robert put his arm around his wife, watching this remarkable young man with their daughter. Over the years, the Torres and Ashford families had become genuinely close, not just through obligation or gratitude, but through authentic affection. Miguel and Emma had a special bond. He was like the older brother she'd never had. The families celebrated holidays together, attended each other's important events, and supported one another through challenges. Miguel had stayed humble despite the attention and opportunities. He tutored younger students in his neighborhood. He volunteered at free clinics. He spoke at medical conferences about the importance of holistic observation and listening to all voices in healthcare. At 17, he'd already changed medical education. Many schools now included the Miguel Torres case in their curriculum as an example of diagnostic humility. "Mr. Ashford," Miguel said as they stood in the Institute's atrium, "I need to thank you for something beyond the scholarships and opportunities." "What's that?" "For treating me with dignity from the very beginning. You could have been condescending, could have treated me like a charity case, but you always respected me as an equal. That gave me confidence to believe I belonged in places like this." Robert's eyes grew misty. "Miguel, you saved my daughter when I was completely powerless. That night, you weren't the poor janitor's son and I wasn't the billionaire. We were just two people who loved Emma and wanted her to live. That's the only relationship that mattered." Dr. Chen checked her watch. "Miguel, we need to start rounds in 10 minutes. Say your goodbyes." Miguel hugged Emma one more time, promised to visit soon, and embraced Margaret and Robert. Then he followed Dr. Chen deeper into the hospital, his hospital now, not as someone who cleaned it but as someone who would help heal within it. As he walked away, Robert called out, "Miguel." Miguel turned. "Remember, you didn't get here because you were lucky. You got here because you saw what others missed, because you were brave enough to speak up, and because you never let anyone tell you that your voice didn't matter. Don't ever forget that." Miguel nodded, his eyes bright with emotion and determination. Later that day, during his first patient rounds, Miguel stood beside a 6-year-old boy with mysterious symptoms that had stumped the attending physicians for a week. The other interns discussed complex diagnostic theories. Miguel listened carefully to their ideas, then did something unusual. He asked to speak with the janitor who cleaned the boy's room. "Have you noticed anything unusual?" Miguel asked the older man. "Any smells, patterns, anything that seems off?" The janitor, surprised to be consulted, thought carefully. "Well, the trash from his room always has this strange chemical smell, like nail polish remover maybe." Miguel's mind raced. Fruity chemical smell, ketones, combined with the symptoms. "Dr. Chen," he said calmly, "I think we should test for diabetic ketoacidosis." They ran the tests. Miguel was right. The boy started treatment within hours. As Miguel left the hospital that evening, exhausted but exhilarated from his first day, he passed the janitor who'd given him the crucial observation. "Thank you," Miguel said sincerely. "You helped save that boy today." The janitor looked shocked. "I just told you what I smelled. You're the one who knew what it meant." "We both saved him," Miguel corrected gently. "That's how medicine should work." Miguel walked out into the California sunset, past the memorial plaque that had been installed near the hospital entrance. "In honor of Miguel Torres, who taught us that wisdom can come from unexpected places, that curiosity and courage can save lives, and that the most important qualification for making a difference is the willingness to see what others miss and the bravery to speak what others won't say." 17-year-old Miguel Torres, once invisible, was now impossible to ignore. But more importantly, he'd helped create a world where every voice mattered, where observation trumped assumption, and where a child with a mop and a dream could change medicine forever. Emma was alive and thriving. The Torres family was secure. The Institute was saving lives. And Miguel was becoming the kind of doctor he'd always dreamed of being, one who never forgot that sometimes the most important person in the room is the one everyone else is ignoring. Some stories end with happily ever after. This one ended with purposefully ever after, a young man fulfilling his potential, a family forever grateful, and a medical system forever changed. all because a 12-year-old boy had noticed a smell and refused to stay silent. The end.